Welcome to the Colorization Adobe Photoshop tutorial. What we're going to do is we're going to learn how to colorize a black and white photo to make it look like a color image. Now we're not wanting to make the image completely photorealistic. We're wanting to make it more of a nostalgic look with pastel colors. Similar to what the images looked like in the 1950s. And so as I go through the process, I'm going to give you some tool tips and some color tips, but you'll have as much freedom as you want to choose the spectrum and color choices. But this is a learning process, so try not to get frustrated. We may have to do this in several steps. All right, the first thing you need to do is make sure your image is the right size. So we're going to do an 8x10 at 300 resolution. Once your image is cropped, you'll hit your check mark. Okay. And you also want to make sure that the image is a color image, even though it may be grayscale. So you might want to go up to your image mode. If it's on grayscale, pull it down to RGB. If you have an image that is partially colored, you can actually get rid of that color by going to image mode grayscale and then going back to image mode RGB, and then it'll be ready for colorization. All right, the primary tool that we're going to be using for this project is the paintbrush tool. All right, so we're going to use the paintbrush tool. Not the color replacement tool, but the paintbrush tool. All right, and we're going to go up here to the top of the screen, and we're going to be using the brush, probably with a soft brush to begin with, but if you need to get into to really fine knit corners and details, you can make it harder. You might start out with a fairly large diameter brush, but as you get into finer and finer spots, you'll probably want a smaller diameter brush. And probably the most important thing is to make sure your brush mode is not on normal, but is on the color. Okay, so when we are working with this, this is what it kind of looks like. All right, and then we're going to do an opacity of about 50 to 60%. Okay, when you start your colorization, you might start with something that is easy and that you have control over. So we're going to start out with like a little red ribbon on his hat. Instead of using the really vibrant color of red, I'm actually going to use a faint pastel color. You might call it pink, but it's actually just a faded color of red. And so as I do this, I've got a 50% opacity, and I have the color here. If you have a 50% opacity, you can actually build on the color amount. So if I go back over it, it actually adds to it. If you don't like that effect, you can have your opacity at 100%, and you can see the concentration of the color will be stronger, but it will never get any stronger than what you're applying the first time. With a lower opacity, you can build on it. Okay, one thing you might want to keep in mind is if you make a mistake, you can actually use your history palette to undo the actions. Or if you want to take away a color, you can actually use the sponge tool at desaturate at 100%, and that will actually allow you to strip out the color in certain areas. And so that's desaturate is a helpful tool if you make a mistake in an area. All right, so I've chosen the little ribbon. Now I'm going to go over here to the picker. If you look down at the bottom of your toolbar, that's where your picker is. you actually have a choice of choosing your foreground color from your picker. When you click on that box, it pulls up all of the spectrum of the rainbow. So I'm going to go on to another color. I'm going to try to colorize his hat. All right, so not using my desaturate tool, I'm going to use my brush tool and see how you colorize it. Now, obviously, I don't want to color the background, so I undo that. One thing you may notice is it doesn't look as natural when you colorize really highlighted areas. So my suggestion would be to lower your opacity when you're dealing with really bright highlights. And then increase your opacity as you're dealing with shadows. Kind of blend it together. So that way it looks more natural. Some things you may notice is that when you colorize areas of white, you won't really retain a lot of color. But if you color areas of shadow, the color will be rich and deep. So just be aware of that. If you come to a point where you can't put color on a part of your image, you actually might have to use a different mode than the color mode. You can use the normal mode with a lower opacity, and that will allow you to apply color in a really faint area. So if I go back to color where what this was, then it'll look more natural. Okay, I'm going to stop now and give you guys an opportunity to kind of play around and test.